Hi, everybody, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar on CMMC 2.0 myth busting. I'm Megan Sossaman, Marketing Manager here at Dataprise, and I'm going to go over a couple of items before we get into the good stuff. The webinar is going to run about 45 minutes, and it's being recorded, so the recording and materials will be sent to you post-event. And we ask that you submit any questions that you may have now or throughout the webinar in the questions section, and we will address them at the conclusion. A little bit about Dataprise. If you don't know us, Dataprise is the leading strategic IT solutions provider to IT leaders who believe technology should allow you to be the best at what you do. And on the right-hand side here, you'll see some of the industry-leading solutions that we deliver. Not surprisingly, cybersecurity is at the top of the list as we lead with a cyber-first mentality when delivering solutions to our clients. We then layer on the additional components to support your organization. From fully managed IT to standalone support services, we have you covered. So let me introduce you now to our speakers. From Edwards Performance Solutions, we have Joy Beland, Senior Cybersecurity Consultant. Thank you for joining us today, Joy. And then for Edwards Performance Solutions, actually, they aim to empower organizations through business performance solutions and by delivering the highest quality services, including assessing cyber vulnerabilities and other areas of consulting. And then finally, from the Dataprise side of, we have our two vCISOs, Maximo Bredfeldt and Sam Bourgeois. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to you, Sam, to get us started today.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the introduction. Appreciate that, Megan. So happy to be here today. So happy to have you guys joining us. For our agenda, it's going to be a little bit short, but I think you're going to have a lot of fun. The first thing we're going to do is start with a foundation. So we're gonna get our bricks out, get our mortar out. We're going to build up a little brick house of CMMC. What is CMMC? Where did it come from? Just do kind of an overview. There's no better person to give us that than Joy, who I'm thrilled to hear from today. And then we'll move into our busting our 6 CMMC 2.0 myths, and then finally round it out with some Q&A. If you have questions following our conversations today, we'll try to address that. So Joy, I am so excited. Can you give us an overview, a historical perspective? What the heck is CMMC?
You betcha, Samuel. And thank you so much for having me join you. You know, and I'm a provisional assessor and provisional instructor with CMMC AB, and my firm Edwards plays in like every different area of CMMC. So I just bring this up at the outset because I've been working with both Maximo and Samuel for several months now. We're teaming up on a lot of learning initiatives, and I have to say I'm just so impressed with the depth of knowledge that your team has. It's really great to see. So to give you kind of bring you up to speed on what is CMMC, first of all, if you haven't heard CMMC, I would be shocked. It seems like it's everywhere in cybersecurity news. This is the first initiative where the Department of Defense, as the first government agency, is trying to make sure that the supply chain is secure. And what that means is that there is sensitive data shared between the Department of Defense and all of the prime contractors and subcontractors in the ecosystem that are helping to fulfill all of the goods and services that the DoD wants to buy. So as they place those orders, they're passing down things like technical drawings, nuclear information, anything that is going to help support the defense of the United States, if you will. And the suppliers who give this type of goods and services to the DMD, who are selling the goods and services, they're called the Defense Industrial Base. So what happened was back in 2014, I believe it was, the Department of Defense realized that China was flying one of our fighter jets, designed as the, I think it was the F-35 bomber, displaying it as a show, at a show before we finished getting ours off the production line. And everybody was scratching their heads going, how in the world did this happen? And it was a break in the supply chain. You know, it was a breach that happened between a prime and a subcontractor, and all of a sudden cybersecurity got to be really serious. And what they're doing is they're folding in cybersecurity mandates into the acquisition process. So plain English, that means they're not going to give a contract to a prime contractor to fulfill a good or service unless it has a guarantee of some level of cybersecurity built in. So it's very important. It's not just protecting our nation's defense, but it actually can come down to the lives of our troops. And for that reason, I have the American flag behind me. This is a mission for the United States for our health and welfare of all. So CMMC is the Cybersecurity Model or Maturity Model Certification. And what that means is that it's a framework, if you will, of cybersecurity controls that grows in maturity, which means that it's going to be a lot more established and developed throughout the organization, depending on the level of sensitivity of data that you are actively processing, transmitting, or storing as one of those links in the supply chain. So we take a look at the next slide. So what happened is it's called DFARS, is a rule, specifically 252, 204, 7012, that states in the acquisition process that a organization who is going to provide to the Department of Defense has to have an implementation of the NIST 800-171 framework. So that framework, and for those of you who are familiar with cybersecurity, NIST is the leading publisher of the most respected types of cybersecurity controls and families. They have the NIST cybersecurity framework. The most common thing that most people will rely on is the NIST 853 catalog of controls. But this NIST 800-171 is tailored to the privacy of data. And so what they said in the DFARS ruling is you have to implement these 110 controls. And the whole defense industrial base, this is back in 2016, said, oh, 110 controls, that's a lot. How do we prove it? And the Department of Defense said, you just have to self-attest. You just have to say, I've implemented them and we're going to trust you. But the trust process broke down because unfortunately it had no teeth behind it. And if we can take a look at the next slide, please. What happened is that they came out seeing that it was going to be really hard for the defense industrial base to understand the implementation, and they issued interim rules saying we're going to introduce CMMC, which takes that NIST 800-171, all of those catalogs, and puts in 5 different levels of maturity. And we'll say in our contract whether you have to be a level 1, a level 3, or a level 5 in order to be awarded this contract. But important to the original model, which you see on the left-hand side there, number 1, there was a lot of complexity with 5 different levels. And number 2, the amount of processes, practices, documentation required in order to get through that was going to be very expensive for a large part of the defense industrial base. And number 3, they wanted an outside party, a third-party assessor, to come into every organization and actually confirm that through an assessment, formal assessment process, that those controls had been put in place. And the new model of CMMC, which was introduced in November, they really made that a lot more digestible, if you will, to all of those organizations. Some of these are small manufacturing firms that have like 10 employees. They're not all the Boeings and the Lockheed Martins. And so they had to make it something more workable. They made it 3 levels, reduced a lot of the maturity required for proving the documentation part of it, and said for level 1 and some of level 2, you can still self-attest as opposed to having a assessment firm come in and verify that. So that's really the background on what CMMC is. We're waiting for the final ruling. We have interim rules in place now, and we're waiting for the final ruling to kind of codify this into law and have this become an actual mandate in all contracts in the new 2.0 model sometime between Q4 of this year and Q3 of next year. It's a 9 to 24 month process. So that's the timeline that we're looking at.
Thank you. Well, thank you for that. Was just it's a great. I love to hear it every time I hear it. I love to hear the overview. It's so helpful for me, and I hope it was helpful for you if you're in attendance here to have that summary. Let's jump into our first myth. So our first myth. What we're going to do here, we're going to kind of unpack it a little bit. We're going to break each one of these down. So first myth. This is a myth. It's not a statement of fact. CMMC does not apply to me because I don't deal with DoD contracts. So for this one, let me rephrase the myth into the form of a question, and then let's hear from Maximo. What do you think? Should I be CMMC compliant anyway? I mean, I'm not DoD. Should I be CMMC compliant anyway? Maximo, what do you think about that?
Well, I want to phrase my answer in examples, because this year has been, previous year was big learning experience for me. Thank you to Edwards, because we attended the 17 domains in 17 weeks, and I thought I knew a lot, and then I realized I didn't know anything. And at the same time, it was a little bit refreshing to see that there is still a lot of open questions, and it does take, there's so many nuances that even when you have a room full of like full-blown experts, this can be pretty difficult to navigate. So questions like these it makes total sense that people would sit there and like, hey, does it make sense for me or not? So I want to bring up 3 real-world examples of why, even if your organization may not be one of the, I think, 300,000 organizations that will need to be following this, you may want to still prepare to follow it, or do your homework to become CMMC compliant. And the first example was we had a client, a small firm, that approached us with a hurry. Like, we need to get our security standards up right now, because we want to bid in a DoD contract that's coming up in 30 days. Without a solid starting point, they were, of course, not very well positioned to accomplish that. That's time frame that even for a small organization, 30 days to revamp everything and get you to any level of compliance can be daunting. I'm not saying it's impossible, but definitely very challenging. So that would be the first consideration that I would say, partially busting this myth, is you may not be dealing with DoD today, but you may have that in your books in the future, or you may encounter an opportunity that sounds very attractive to your business. And if you start following these practices, you will be better prepared. If you're certified, even better, that way you can switch to a different vertical or expand your business, starting to deal with DoD. So that was the first example. The second example, I think, was for us as a company. We, Dataprise, we are pursuing CMMC, and Samuel and I are both part of this endeavor. And we realized that it's going to help us position our company way better, even though we don't need to be CMMC compliant. It's going to help us. We're convinced that this is going to expand our chances in the future, not just to pursue a DoD contractor, but I think it's a reputable thing to do. And not just, hey, we're SOC compliant, but we want to know how this works. So that makes us qualified to help other people navigate this framework. So, and the third one is, I had a very interesting conversation with a client that they don't need to follow any type of framework, but they want to up their game when it comes to cybersecurity. In my opinion, CMMC provides with a pretty comprehensive set of controls that make sense for pretty much any business to put into place. Like yes, some of them may be a giant pain, but the idea is to protect your information, your client's information, and your vendors. So those 3 things, I think, are very valid reasons to start looking into this, even if at this point it may not be required for your business.
I'm glad you brought that up. Even if it's not required, it's still a good thing. Joy, what are your thoughts on this one?
One of the things that I like to point out with CMMC is that the NIST 800-171 controls are based on a lot of predecessors that are common to cybersecurity. So you can't go wrong if you are taking a framework that has been tailor-made, stemming from the NIST 853 control catalog based on NIST CSF. If you look at all of the references that were used in building out the 800-171, it even stems from the CIS controls. And I know that I'm throwing out a lot of acronyms here, but really what I'm trying to say is that if you don't already adhere to some kind of cybersecurity framework, you can't go wrong picking NIST 800-171 as your framework because it cross-references so many others, right? So that's one of the great things about it, is that it's very easy to pivot from that to a different framework if all of a sudden you need to show that you have compliance in something. Because it has the built-in maturity, you can progress from level 1 to level 2 and kind of measure your growth and show your return on investment. There's a lot of benefits to it that you don't have to be having a third-party assessor come in and paying for all of that. But if you're following it really well, there's a good chance you're going to be the high apple on the tree as opposed to the low-hanging apple when it comes to the hackers that are looking for an easy target, because you simply are working in a way that you can measure towards the progress of becoming a much more secure environment anyways.
Yeah, agreed. Now, you and I were talking about this, Joy, prior to this call. We were talking about the latest news we've heard, which is the presidential executive orders. We've had 2 now, right? The most recent one was last week or week before last. And so, if you're looking for a reason to get off your duff and get this done, look no further than the White House press briefings, the Department of Justice conversations about future-facing whistleblowing and things like this. You're going to hear this in the news. I mean, it's absolutely a tidal wave of support for this basic cyber hygiene from all angles in all industries. This is just where we need to be, right? It's just the right answer, no matter how you cut it. Now, Joy, we talked about some specifics on this one. Is there anything you'd like to add about this executive order conversation and kind of what you've been hearing?
Well, I think it's really curious that we haven't had some kind of federal legislation yet of small businesses, especially the ones that deal in any way in the supply chain to the government agencies. Mm-hmm. But, in addition to the ones you have on the screen, there's a lot of civilian agencies that are considering taking on CMMC. They're all kind of watching right now, but they are publicly saying it to the media that they are watching CMMC to see what kind of adaptation they might make themselves to implement it. DHS came out yesterday saying that they're going to take a kind of pivot off of CMMC and start to have their own program. So everyone is going to jump into this. And it's not just the government that's going to be pushing it down. There's a lot of market pressures like the cyber insurance companies. I mean, we could do a whole nother webinar on the amount of liability that they are taking on, not requiring some kind of framework implemented at every business that they insure. It's like you can drive a car if you have insurance, and the way that you got insurance is that you prove that you have a driver's license and a good driving record. A business right now can go out there and get cyber insurance without proving that they've got their driver's license and a good driving record, in the way of, we don't have proof that we have a good cyber posture, and we may have already been hit 3 or 4 times in the last couple of years, but we're not going to tell you that because we want you to insure us. So there's a lot of market pressures in addition to what you're looking at on the screen that are going to be coming down. So some legislation and market pressures are going to push this forward fast.
I agree, and I think it stands to reason that when all those things do get shaken out, that the person who's got their cyber hygiene in order and they have a superior posture when it comes to general security and practices, they're going to see lower premiums at some point. The market's going to find a way to kind of equalize. And so by preparing in advance, you're gonna see some kind of advantageous outcome one way or another.
Exactly.
I don't want to extend too much on the whole cybersecurity insurance and liabilities, but it is a fact that in the last year alone, many of the carriers have upped their game and their requirements in big time. We had one of our clients, they had a hard time declining. They're a new client, but they had a hard time getting declined by, I think, 13 out of the 15 insurance companies that they applied to. And the reality is that many of the controls that or the checkboxes that they're asking you to check are the low-hanging fruit of controls that are part of CMMC. So a lot of things that were a luxury a couple of things ago, they're mandatory nowadays. So, and the premiums that the penalties that you can experience are massive if you're not following those. So that is a very good framework to follow. Even if you cherry pick some of those controls, you can still map them in the future to help you get there faster.
Yeah.
Next slide, pretty please. So I get to present myth number 2, and would say they haven't made up their minds yet. We just started with this, and now we have version 2.0. I'll just wait until I mess with this, because obviously they don't have their ducks in a row on this. Another perfect example, our company Dataprise, we were dabbing in the middle of our journey to become CMMC compliant, and this whole thing changed. For us, it wasn't too shocking, I'm gonna guess, because our leadership had a plan to follow the maturity models. That we're gonna aim for level 1 first and level 2 first, second, and level 3 following, and then we want to stay there. So it kind of pancaked down just one level, which is fine. But I do understand that some people may feel hesitant to get started to a process that it may seem to the outside that it's not that mature yet. So if I frame this as a question, Sam, should I wait until the rulemaking process is completed to follow this or not?
I think the unequivocal answer is heck no, right? Like no. I mean, like hearing our answers to myth 1, why would you wait? I know. So the truth is, there is a slightly complex and slightly convoluted side story to this whole CMMC process, which is when the rulemaking will be complete, there's a timeline, and when the implementation will occur. And without going into the weeds there, just understand that theoretically it's possible for rulemaking to be an ongoing conversation, but the actual implementation, the deadline, is something totally different. So don't put yourself in a situation where you say, well, I'm just going to wait for the final rules and then make the changes then. Nothing's going to change that really matters. The standards are the standards are the standards. The controls are the controls are the controls. So yes, did we lose a couple of controls from CMMC 1 to CMMC 2, called the Delta 20 or whatever? Yes, that's absolutely true. But in terms of NIST, there's no reason to wait. Absolutely zero. No reason to wait. You're just going to put yourself in a bind when it finally does shake out and it finally does become become official. When you're missing a contract or you're in a tight deadline, God forbid the 30-day timeline that Maximo was talking about earlier, to implement these changes, you're going to be kicking yourself. There's absolutely no reason to wait. And if anything, there are incentives to go early. It's advantageous at this point. We go to the next
slide up that speaks to that. And Samuel, there you are.
And so, we don't have to read this out loud. You can read this for yourself on the far end, but it's absolutely advantageous for you as an organization to do this ahead of time, because we don't know. We don't know what potential incentives are going to come, down the pipes. If you're already compliant, or if you've already been seeking certification or seeking your CCP, that's just going to make you more prepared, better prepared in the long run. So I say, heck no, do not wait. What do you think?
No, I agree with that. That does bring to the question, though, okay, this changed right now. What are the differences in level 1? What was level 1 and level 1 now in 2.0? And level 2 got eliminated, pancake. So this slide illustrated visually, and I think it's really, really nice. Now, Joy, can you explain a little bit what that bifurcation in level 2 to the third party and self-assessment, and the general differences between level 1 and version 1.0 and 2.0 of CMMC?
Sure. Well, in making it more digestible to the defense industrial base, one of the things that they had to get realistic about is that if a company only handles the actual contract, which is known as FCI, the Federal Contract Information, that document, that paperwork, the statement of work, is going to have just basic purchase terms on what's being purchased, maybe the shipping destination, stuff like that, basic specifications that isn't considered to be really sensitive data. So they got realistic about it. They said, all right, for CMMC level 1, For FCI, we want just the basic controls, and you can still do the self-attestation. Now, they're expecting in the self-attestation that every single year you've gone through those 17 controls. It's not 110, it's only 17. And you've created what's known as a system security plan that documents exactly how you have implemented these 17 controls. And every year you have to reassess that. And what you're going to do is take that information and upload it into the Department of Defense's online acquisition system that says, I'm eligible to receive contracts. Now, circling back to the potential incentive for who's got the information in there and proving that it's pretty accurate, or at least designating which items they don't have implemented yet, but a deadline for when they will have it implemented. And by the way, that's called a POAM, yet another really fun acronym. It means a plan of action and milestones, a POAM. So if you have a basic document there saying this is how we've implemented 16 out of 17, we have a POAM that is going to assign the resources and a committed timeline to getting the last one implemented. You've got that in there, done. You're done with level 1, and you just do that again 12 months out, right? So don't wait. There's no reason to wait for this. Get that information in there, be ready for it, know what gap you are working with, so those items can go on the POAM, right? Now, at level 2, you have a lot more sensitive information that you're dealing with. So this is called controlled unclassified information. It's not classified information. That's a whole nother ball of wax, right? This controlled and classified information, there's 2 categories that they're going to break it into according to the sensitivity. So if you work on something that's a critical system, it has something to do with the critical infrastructure, nuclear systems, things like that, it's probably going to be assigned the higher level of the level 2, where you have to have a third party come in and assess your environment for all 110 controls. If it's a little bit less sensitive, then it's going to be given a category where you can still do that self-attestation. You still would go through the 110 controls internally, create all of the documentation, generate all of the evidence that you meet those 110 controls, and then post that information into the acquisition system. If you're doing that self-assessment at level 2, because you have slightly less sensitive data, you still have to do that every 12 months, every year. So that's the difference between moving from the original model to the 2.0 model of CMMCs that allowed those 2 areas of self-attestation. Again, why would you be waiting? Because there's a lot of, Samuel and Maximo, you guys have the end clients that are struggling with getting this incorporated. Is it not a huge investment of time and money and resources and staff to focus on this to get you all the way to the finish line?
Really
So, a lot of companies are 12 months to 24 months out for being able to meet those 110 controls. And if you're going to wait, like Maximo said, if you're going to wait until all of a sudden this is final ruling, it could be a month later. It could be 30, 60, 90 days later that it starts showing up in contracts. And those businesses that have sustained revenue based on servicing the Department of Defense, either as a sub or a prime, are all of a sudden going to be caught, with the things that they didn't want to be showing, saying we're not ready, and they're going to get passed over in that acquisition process.
And just because you can pull in doesn't mean you should.
Right, exactly. So there's the final part of that, and one of the things I want to talk about is the next slide, the False Claims Act. I'll go through this quickly, but really what this is the False Claims Act has been in existence since our Civil War, like back in 1878, something like that. And really it's a way for the government to deal with fraud. So in the Civil War, they found out that people were supplying them goods, charging too much money for what they were delivering, not delivering the right thing, all of that, and they were just bleeding money. So they said, wait a minute, our Department of Justice can actually prosecute you for committing fraud against the government. And for the first time in history, since all of those years ago, that False Claims Act has been used by the Department of Justice to prosecute cybersecurity fraud for the very first time. So this happened in 2019, 2020. It started to roll in because of CMMC, because of the Department of Defense having issues with people that were self-attesting but not actually doing what they said they were doing, and they were caught. And so the thing that I want the organizations on the webinar to pay attention to is that the False Claims Act doesn't need to be the government coming in and randomly assessing your company and saying, well, wait a minute, you say that you have the 110 controls, but we're seeing that obviously there's an egregious attempt to not implement these controls. You have no paperwork, you have nothing showing that you've even initiated it, right? Or that it's been brought to your attention by internal IT or by consultants many times, and you chose not to implement it. So it's an egregious act of fraud. This can be brought to the Department of Justice by an internal employee who knows that the company over and over again has refused to do the right thing, that they're signing a contract saying, yes, we've got it and implemented, but they're not actually doing it. That person is called a whistleblower, and there's a bunch of protections that they get as a whistleblower. When you're looking at what's on the screen here, the examples that we have of Aerojet Rocketdyne and of Cisco were both brought to the Department of Justice via a whistleblower who complained over and over and over again at each of the different companies, 2 different people, and then the management got tired of hearing them complain and trying to make them toe the line and fired them. So they took all of the evidence of everything that they had just been through to the Department of Justice, and they got 30% of the penalty. Now, in the case of Cisco, I think it was $8.6 million. So that whistleblower got almost a $3 million payout for turning evidence against their employer over to the DOJ. So keep that in mind. The False Claims Act is something to pay attention to.
And to expand a little bit on that and bring it to a tangible level, is I've experienced this, well, secondhand, that when people hear self-attestation, they take it more lax, and that should not be the case. Not just because you are doing your own homework, it doesn't mean that you get to relax too much. I understand if certain controls you want to push out a little bit, but at the end of the day, how does did 2.0 change anything about is there flexibility? Do I pass or fail, or how is there any gray zone there?
I mean, it comes back to the poem. Like, the whistleblower doesn't have an opportunity to whistleblow if the company identifies that they have a gap in those controls. They're doing the self-assessment process. And they get, so many of them, they're just in the home stretch. They need to get their score into the acquisition system. It's called the SPRS. They need to get that in. They can put those remaining items, identifying clearly what they know they are beholden to and committed to implementing. The time frame, it has to be closed out within 6 months of when they're putting this in there, with the actual well thought out plan of how they're going to get there. So they want to see, the government's going to want to see, all right, well, I see that you've assigned $20,000, that this is going to be implemented site-wide. It's a new multi-factor authentication system. There's training associated with it, and you expect to have it deployed on all mobile devices within 3 months. Like, there's your answer. That's not an organization trying to commit fraud against the government in delivering goods and services on a contract. So the 2.0 version gives some latitude there and says, all right, we know you're self-attesting. Don't lie. Be honest with us. Tell us what you haven't implemented, and we'll give you the space to do that. Right? It's a really great thing that they've done for the defense industrial base.
Right. Myth number 3. Sam, you want to take this one?
Yeah, I can jump in here. So this is a good one. I'm already PCI, I'm already ISO, or I'm already SOC 2, or I'm already fill in the blank. Right? You hear that a lot, right? And so on this one, really the question is, and I'm translating, right? I'm translating. How does CMMC correlate, correspond, map, link to these other control frameworks? For me, I've definitely heard this one, and I think that there's some conversation to be had about inheritance. You mentioned we see mentions of inheritance as it pertains to SOC 2, but by and large, CMMC and NIST is there are no linkages. There are no distinct, corresponding, okay, control X to control Y from ISO, from PCI, from CIS, even though there are similarities. And so for me, the big one here is there are not similarities. There are similarities, but there are not direct linkages or correlations. And each one of those control frameworks is so distinct and so different. The ISO, for example, ISO 27001 is one that I've had personal experience with. I can tell you that one is so much different from a NIST framework, from a CMMC framework, because a lot of times it's a data center or it's a location, et cetera. And that's not what we're talking about. So when Joy was talking about the CUI in your environment, the FCI in your environment, that has to be determined by you, the organization. The boundary for those controls has to be determined by you, the organization. I'm curious to hear what your thoughts there, Joy, on that one are.
Exactly. We're having a lot of conversations internally about if there is any existing mappings between SOC 2 even, because SOC 2 is fairly mature. If it's done right, it's fairly mature around cybersecurity. And there's a lot of organizations out there doing SOC 2 auditing. SOC 2 is not a certification, though. And I want to be really careful about that. There's a lot of companies out there saying, I'm SOC 2 certified. Sorry, there's no such thing. It's the wrong way to phrase it. SOC 2 means that you have demonstrated, here's my list of controls that I think are important, and this is how I meet them. And somebody comes in and says, according to what you tell us, the way that you say that you meet them looks like they match up. Okay, so that's a very good report. It's an analysis of whether or not what you're saying you're doing seems to be true. It's not extremely technical. Not a lot of the SOC 2 auditors. I mean, it's really the AICPA is an alliance of CPAs. Very good auditors. I'm not going to disparage them by any means, but it's not always necessarily technical. CMMC is very technical. I mean, this is talking about data loss prevention and protection, intrusion detection, right? So you have to have an ability to know when data is being breached. You have to know, and a lot of these, PCI on its own, highly technical, boundary oriented. That's great. Doesn't have the maturity, the policies, the processes built into it as an organization. ISO, maturity based, right? So there's a just different way of looking at all of these. If you're already compliant with all three of those things, I'll say you probably have a lead over other organizations in getting started on CMMC. You're used to some level of measuring your success, and that's good.
Let's put that graphic up, Megan, if you wouldn't mind. And Maximo, as we put that up, this is just kind of a nice, simple graphic to kind of express what we're trying to convey here. These things are.
I was gonna ask you if you could very briefly go through this. We do need to speed up a little bit because we're kind of halfway through. But I do want to point out that we, as Dataprise, we were guilty of that myth because we, as we were working on the CMMC compliance, our leadership thought, and I get it. It makes sense. Okay, there are two frameworks. They're all accomplishing the same goal. Why don't you work together and see what you can pull out of it? And yeah, that's true that many of the engagements and efforts to work towards the SOC 2 compliance overlap with CMMC for sure, but there is no direct, in our SOC 2 we said that we're doing this. This is exactly the checkboxes that we need to do. Yes, some of them are doable, but they're not the same thing. So I think it would be easier maybe to do it the other way around. So if you're SOC 2 compliance and then wrap those controls and build your case of a SOC 2 based on that, but there is no real coercion there. So your graph.
That's a great summary. It's in the context of the Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation supplements. It's a mouthful, right? And your federal acquisition regulations up on the top of the graph there. In terms of those definitions, those absolutely are mapping directly to and from your 171 controls. And obviously, if you know anything about your 853 controls, those are all hand in hand as well. They absolutely dovetail into one another. Now, what we're saying again, crystal clear is that, you go to ISO 27002 or ISO 27001 for security controls, it's a whole different thing. And they may absolutely overlap in functionality in terms of the specific control you implement. There may be some overlap, but the way that you're going to evidence, and I think to me, that's one of the big differences. How are you going to evidence that is going to be dramatically different. And defining the policies, you can provide evidence to ISO, but you have to provide, policy in many cases for CMMC. So that's I guess that's my big takeaway there. Let's look at number 4, and I'll kick this one off. So I have an IT person, or I have an IT department already. It should be fine. I dread this one because I used to be that IT person. So for this one, really the question, if I had to rephrase it, is, can I handle this internally on my own? Is this something that I can really expect to get done inside of my organization on my own? Joy, what do you think?
Well, so implementing these controls is a very large order. And here's the thing, is that you don't know what you don't know, unfortunately. So it seems clear cut that you've got NIST 800-171. A lot of people didn't even know that there was NIST 800-171A, the accompanying assessment guide that walks through individual objectives that an auditor would watch for with every one of those controls. The other thing is that there's a certain level of documentation and processes that must be required. And the IT person is not the person that is going to sit there through the entire audit and answer every question. They're going to go to the people that work with IT, the human resources department, the business units that actually flow and work with that kind of data, the engineers that use it on their laptops, and they're going to interview them and say, well, this is the policy that I was given, and this is what the IT department says you're doing. Tell me how you do your job. And if they don't say exactly what the documentation says, or vice versa, there's all these different ways that you can generate evidence, then you've got a mismatch on that, and it's cause for concern. So the biggest thing I would say is that if you think you want to handle it internally, send that internal person to one of the CCP classes. It's a 3 to 5 day boot camp. It walks through all of the basics of the CMMC. You two have participated in our peer groups. It does a lot of the same work in it, but this is an actual certification. They take an exam at the end of it. It's like a 2 or 3 hour exam, and then they are going to be a lot more qualified to work with the stakeholders at the organization and get the actual resources they need, sometimes including having a third party come in and just help them go through like a mock assessment to make sure they're good, and kind of spread that liability beyond the IT department. That's one of my biggest concerns is, don't put all of that liability and responsibility on one guy or a group of people. Have the organization represent this the right way.
Absolutely.
To expand on that a little bit, I think a lot of what would help busting this myth, or what would be useful for everybody to know, is education, right? What's my scope? What am I getting myself into, or my organization into? Many times I have heard, oh yeah, this is, and the other myths play into this same concept. It's like, if I don't understand what I'm getting myself into, I have the wrong expectations, and at that point, I may be putting those wrong expectations on people that are not prepared to deal with it. And if those expectations are way off whack to begin with, because there's so many components. It's not just the size of your organization or your vertical or your starting point in security. Because if you ask me, can my IT guy do this? It so happens that your IT security right now is off the charts good. Yeah, it's doable, but you won't know until you ask the right question. So, and it's not so much just the experience. Have I done this before? I mean, when this started, nobody had done this before. But it's not just that. It's, does that person or that department have the bandwidth? Do they know what that workload is? And I think it's super important too, not to be underestimated, is, do those people have the political influence within the company to get the right gears moving in the right time? Because and then the next question is like my time frame, right? So there are so many questions that it would be that need to be answered before one can say, yep, my IT guy can handle this or not. And the next slide, the keeping that balance is, between IT and security, and I handle this on my own. I mean, not impossible, but yeah, I think it needs to be a mindset that spreads across the entire organization, that it needs to be clear why we're pursuing this. So everybody knows that they're playing a key role in helping the organization achieve this goal as quickly and efficiently as possible. So for the sake of time, I'm going to jump right into myth number 5. I have an IT security policy already. I got this covered. And I mean, that would be a jackpot, right? If you so happen to have an IT security policy, not just written, but also implemented and verified, that it matches with all your controls, that you should go claim the lottery. So Sam, what do you think? Is this, if I have an IT policy, am I okay to go with CMMC?
No way, no how. No way, no how. I mean, I've seen 140-page policies that, you know, that perhaps maybe peripherally address these things, but, you know, I'm glad you brought up the specifics of the controls, Joy. You know, thinking about the descriptors, you know, we have to understand that those 17 level 1 controls, you expand out, it's, you know, 50 something different descriptors that you have to address individually. So imagining that those 17 controls is just 17 little nuggets of information of policy, that's actually not the case. You really need to expand that out and talk about those descriptors individually. And oftentimes that means, you know, supplementing your existing policy if you have one, or you know, in some cases, what it might be wise to do is just kind of create a new appendix, if you will, and address those things, you know, verbatim, right? And being really, really clear, as concise as possible, being really, really clear on documenting how you're addressing those things. That's my thought.
Exactly. That, you know, an assessment is about collecting the artifacts of the evidence, and they have 3 different methods. You know, they're going to examine, interview, or test. If you have a policy, that can be examined, but people are interviewed, and then processes, methods, systems are tested. So it's one thing to say in a document, this is what we do, and it's another for somebody to stand over the shoulder and go, so show me how that prevents me from jumping from this network onto the network that has CUI on it or that has FCI. So yeah, it's a lot more robust than just the documentation.
I get a headache just thinking about it.
Oh yeah.
Take it one step at a time, right?
Which brings us to our final myth.
Right.
Yes. There's your headache right there. So for this one, I could pay X amount of money and I could be compliant by Y date. You know, I just throw money at the problem. We want this contract so badly, we're just going to throw money at the problem. Surely somebody can take my cash and just push me over the finish line, right? It's easy. So how do I get there from here? Joy, what do you think about that?
This is my biggest worry. There are companies out there that are selling a solution like an online software platform that says, if you put your information in here, check these boxes, you are CMMC compliant. And I'm like, oh, hell no. Sorry. Heck no. That can never be the case. And so no just software platform can cover 100% of the bases. You actually don't want it to. That does not make you secure. That buys you an easy way out of checking some boxes. It does not make you secure, right? The other thing is that there's a lot of organizations out there saying, oh, we've been doing your IT for 20 years. We'll go through this questionnaire and we'll do it for you. And it's only going to cost you $2,000. And then when it comes to actually having an assessment and you're sitting there going, well, wait a minute, I already spent all this money getting ready and you're telling me I'm nowhere close to actually being accurate about what was reported. Don't burn money. Like, it really is that you get what you pay for when it comes to a good cyber posture. That's the whole purpose of this, is protect the nation's defense. You know, let's do it the right way.
Yeah,
right.
absolutely.
And this is also one of the ones that I've personally run into with, I know it sounds comical, but yes, exactly that. It's like, I want to pay you X amount of dollars and I want to be compliant by X date without anything else. And again, it's about managing expectations, is educating people about how it's not just, this is not a product. This is not something that you can unbox and it's a magical appliance that you install in the corner and boom, you're compliant. It has so many people components in this, and the amount of time that it takes you, yeah, it's 100% going to be dependent on the amount of resources that you put in there, the quality of those resources, and your starting point, and of course, which goal is that you're trying to achieve. And all those components, since they are in a way quantifiable, but it can hang on something like, okay, we don't know who's in charge of going to put that sign on the door that says only authorized personnel, right? So it needs to be, we are security professionals, we need to push that idea that this is a journey, it's a process, not a package, and it's going to be heavily dependent on how invested you and your organization are going to be to make this successful. So it's hard to put a dollar amount, but the effort's gonna, the more effort you put into it, the smaller it should be.
Excellent.
So Joy, I guess final thoughts, kind of wrapping it up, based on what Maximo just said, like what is the right way, so who can help you? What's the right way to seek help for CMMC compliance?
So organizations like yours, Dataprise, I think, has done a really good job in embracing everything there is to know about CMMC. There's certification courses where you're not just getting the certification for internal folks or for people that are consultants and want to really do a good job. It really is great knowledge that we're teaching in these CCP and then the CCA courses. And there's a lot of licensed training providers out there, like my company, Edwards. Make sure you use a licensed training provider and don't just go taking, a 3 or 5 day boot camp for something that isn't going to test you and give you a formal certification through CMMC. It's really important to do that because that has value. That says we have skin in the game. We've invested in our resources to do this the right way. So that's super important. But the most important thing is know where your gaps are. If you have to be CMMC compliant or you're thinking about it, have someone like Dataprise come in and go through the environment to help you walk through, this is where you are now, this is where you need to be. Let's see how we can help you get there in a way that you can measure your progress, that makes the best use of your resources, the best bang for the buck, and just do that the right way. If you're sharing that responsibility with a third party, you're a lot more apt to do it the right way, and it reduces the liability on any one person in that organization or the organization themselves. So just being able to share that depth of knowledge is really important.
Thanks for that. Thanks for that. Well, Megan, I know we had a question that came up earlier. Would you mind giving us our first chance to respond?
Of course. So we have this question. I get this all the time. Do the 320 derived requirements from NIST SP 800-171A. If I don't pass one of those, do I fail the entire requirement of the 110? If I don't pass one of those, do I fail the entire requirement?
So in a formal assessment, if an assessor team is going through there, we have not received final determination on this, but what we think is going to happen is there will be a process where there's a window allowing at the end of the formal assessment for remediation to take place. That would be where the formal assessment team says, look, you're almost there. You'll have these things left. We're going to come back to you and we're going to do a delta assessment just on those final things within a certain amount of time. Now, the boundaries on what that looks like have not been established yet by the DoD or in the rulemaking process. They will be, though. So it kind of serves the same purpose as the POAM. That's with a formal assessment team, or even if you're doing your own self-assessment, that there is a little bit of room that they're giving in that.
And to expand on that a little bit, this sentence came up so much when we were doing our 17 domains series of meetings. Reasonable effort, right? I think it's going to play, well, we don't know for sure yet. I think are you doing a reasonable effort to commit to this? It may definitely give you an advantage towards being compliant and not flat out failing. If we're talking about, I'm just not doing that and I don't have an explanation for it, I just completely miss it, you're not going to be as well prepared. Whereas if you have that control as part of your POAM and you have at least your demonstrating plan. My opinion is that's going to position you way better, or at least you're going to know what needs to come to you.
I agree with that. I agree with that. We got time for another question, Megan?
We do have time for, well, let me see. We have about, 5 minutes.
Okay. So I see one here. Where should I go for additional information and resources on this topic? I'm guessing the topic is just CMMC in general. This is a good one. I follow a couple of really good folks on LinkedIn, so I would encourage you to get into some LinkedIn groups that are on CMMC discussions. But following the right people and following the right resources is really important. Don't get sucked down a rabbit hole of somebody who wants to vent about how something is happening and this and that. There's lots of things you can get into, Discord channels and mail groups, etc. But my favorite, I like to follow the Summit 7 YouTube. That's just my personal favorite. I like to watch that one and get a lot out of it. CMMCaudit.org is another fun one for me. What about you guys? Is there anything that stands out as a good resource to follow?
My company, Edwards, puts out a lot of information. Please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm easy to find, and we generate content fast, and we share content fast. The other people to follow, Jacob Horn is with Summit 7, and he's the one that does a lot of those videos. His last name is Horne. Connect with him and follow him on LinkedIn, Amira Armand. And then the CMMCAB.org website will point you to all of the different parts of the CMMC ecosystem, including where you can find consultants and assessors to help you out, the licensed training providers, and the CMMC actual model and documentation. There's links off of that website to the Department of Defense website where you can retrieve all of the publicly available documentation.
Anything you want to add there, Maximo?
I was going to say that I got a lot of very useful information out of the Edwards Discord group. I'm not sure if that's public or not, though, so I didn't want to tout it out.
Not at this time, yeah.
Okay.
Anybody that's taking classes with us is
right, but there is a Discord that I'm also a member of that is public, which is the NIST controls. Now, that being said, even though I do every now and then when I have a question, I'm prone to landing on Reddit. I do take all that information that I know it doesn't come from a professional with a grain of sand, but the people at the NIST controls Discord, they have always managed to at least point me in the right direction. So
I will caution, you made me think of something, Maximo, because there's really great resources out there, and then there's also resources where people vent and share a lot of misinformation. So I personally stay away from Reddit. I'd be careful of the Discord servers you join where people seem to have an agenda. Like anything else in this world, there's naysayers out there. There are people that are really not happy with CMMC, and it's a lot of misinformation, which is why we're doing things like the myths, CMMC Myths Busted. You know, I think it's really important to have the right information out there.
And then I guess one more question, then we'll wrap it up. I see one here, Megan. Is there a certification for me that would help me to be more prepared? That's a great question. I think you touched on it earlier, Joy. Obviously, there is the CCP, the Certified CMMC Professional, and that's just essentially the entry level certification if you want to try to do this in house, or just be prepared to oversee the process or to manage the program, even if you're offboarding to a third party provider. Do you want to color that in a little bit more, Joy? I know it's kind of straightforward. More to
so
it, right?
the certification that's available right now is the CCP class. It stands for Certified CMMC Professional. If you connect with me on LinkedIn and message me, I'll get you the information on how to enroll, how much it costs, what the course dates are, and then what's included in it, what you can expect. It's a really great foundational course. We covered how to scope, whether you have FCI or CUI, level 1, level 2, how the assessment process flows. So what to expect in that whole assessment process. And then we go through how do you determine CUI, how should it be marked, how do you govern it, how do you safeguard it. We walk through all of the controls. It's a really robust class that I think that in the same way that we had the experience with you at Dataprise, you guys are like, really opened your eyes to how much more there is to know about CMMC and doing it the right way. And the end goal for me is so that you don't waste your money. Start with the right information. Start by doing it the right way on a path that is proven. Don't waste your money with just somebody out there with an easy button and a cheap quote for you. Be really careful of that.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to close it up. I don't know if there's final thoughts from the group, or Megan, we can turn it over to you to close, or what do you think?
Yeah. No, if there's no final thoughts, I think that was great. And thank you, Joy, for joining us. And thank you, Maximo and Sam, for your time. And thank you to everybody who attended the webinar. And we'll be following up with you shortly. So thank you and have a great rest of your week.
Take care.
Have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.